you're haunted by the mere fact that you're a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Every fucking day. And people who don't think that, you're fucking lying to yourself. You are fucking lying. So every day of my life, I'm haunted by my father, the kids that bullied me, my own insecurities. All these things were this roosting in the back of my head. So I'd be driving home at like 7 o'clock in the morning from an all-night shift and all alone in my truck. And I'd be thinking, what the fuck, man? My life is hell. So one day I came home, and I always come home and watch TV. And this show was on with like Navy SEALs. And I'm afraid of the water. Terrified of the fucking water. I sink like a rock. So I'm sitting there watching these guys going through Navy SEAL training. And I'm like, and I saw what I believe how a man should feel. Very, have pride and dignity himself.
Yeah.
So like, I got to change myself. So literally I sat down on the couch and watching these guys going through SEAL training. And I went through my own mental checklist of how fucked up I am and how many things I would have to change just to get an opportunity to try out for something like that. Have to get smarter, have to get fit, have to lose weight, have to do all these things, start running, swimming, everything. So I finally get to a point where I get the courage to go to a recruiter and say, hey, I want to go try to do this. But when you're 297 pounds and you're going to go try to be one of the fittest people in the world, you get laughed at. So I got laughed at a lot. But in this process was actually hardening my mind. All the laughter, because the laughter used to make me cower. Now I realize that I can no longer hide from my insecurities, hide from all these fears. I had to start wearing them. I had to start talking about them. I had to start being vulnerable because I was always afraid of them. So here I am now. I'm facing them. I finally find a recruiter that says, hey, we'll take you in. And he says, you have less than 3 months to lose 106 pounds. I'm like, that's fucking impossible. So that was my mindset. But I was like, hey, I can't have that kind of mindset. So I went to the dungeon and started using all my insecurities as strength. Instead of looking at being bullied and my dad messing me up and all this stuff like that, I looked at it as, who could have survived all this and still be here with the opportunity to go into Navy SEAL training? And so I started using all these negative things and started flipping everything on top of his head. Instead of saying, woe is me, kicking rocks, head down in the dirt, I started saying, there's not a motherfucker on the planet who would have this opportunity coming from where I came from. They would be a statistic. So I started looking at it as power versus like big time defeat. And slowly but surely, every day, I started changing the voice in my head, because the most important conversation you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. So I slowly started changing that internal dialogue in my head. And there wasn't no fucking like teacher. There was no shrink. There was no mom saying, hey, David, you can do it. No, it was right. Fucking me. And that was where the power came from. The power came from, no one's helping me. No one's coming back to fucking save me. No one's coming back to pull me to the finish line. This is on you. So I power in the fact that if I change this around, I did this. I changed this around. So I started looking at these failures as blessings. Because with all these failures and all these bullies and all these being abused and my learning disabilities and stuttering and everything I had in my life, they are really gifts. They're fucking gifts. And it's not some psychological babble bullshit that I'm using to say, oh no, my life wasn't that bad. No, my life fucking sucked. But they truly were gifts, because all these different trials and tribulations led my mind to where it's at now. So Hell Week, once again, 130 hours. You get 2 hours of sleep maybe, and they beat the shit out of you. Beating like push-ups, sit-ups. And it's near the Pacific Ocean. So you're out in the Pacific Ocean, back in, and that water's fucking freezing. And so you see these men, these great men that I watched on TV, I'm now with them. And for the longest time, I put people who had better childhoods, better grades, better this, better that, I put them all above me. But now I'm on the same playing field as them. So when you get on the same playing field as these men who you think are better than you look at them eye to eye and you realize that they're not. So once again, I'm starting to do all this live autopsy shit, like saying, God, man, you were mind fucking yourself your whole life, thinking that this person came from a nicer house, better education, better mom, better dad, and they're better than you. It's not the case. You have this in you. You may have to dig a little deeper to find it. You know, their family may have started them off a lot better than you, but it's there. It's there. So I started really realizing how powerful the mind was in that third hell week.
Look, there's a bunch of ways that you're not being everything you could be. And it is not supposed to be a whip to knock you down, although maybe it's a whip to knock down your pride, the pride that stops you from being aware of your insufficiencies. It's more like a call to the opposite. It's like, well, you should stop doing those things because you could be so much more than you are.
Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
Yeah, well, you got to improve, right? And so, and you might think, well, I'm a real fixer-upper and I'm really embarrassed about that because there's 50 things wrong with me and like, look at that guy. And so now I feel all terrible because of the comparison and all of that. And first of all, it's unfair because especially by the time you're about 30. When you're 17, you're like every other 17-year-old. And so that kind of social comparison is more appropriate. By the time you're about 30, your life has become quite idiosyncratic, you know. Like let's say your life has 8 dimensions: family, friends, intimate relationships, health, you know, you can kind of lay them out. You're individually positioned in all those dimensions. Your life isn't like anyone else's life. And so you see someone who's doing better than you. It's like you're only seeing one dimension at one slice of time. So it's not reasonable. You don't have the whole picture, you know. So, and then you get down on yourself and take the spirit out of yourself and you get bitter and resentful. It's like that. There's nothing good about that. So, but you do need to improve because there's more to you there's not as much of you as there should be. So what's the comparison? Well, that's easy. You just say, okay, well, here's my position in time and space right now. Here's my virtues and faults. It's like, I can be a little bit better tomorrow in some minor way. Well, that's the right comparison because you are very much like you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Everything's the same about you. And so it's the perfect comparison. And then you get a trajectory going. It's like, well, obviously I'm not perfect, but I'm slightly less terrible than I was yesterday. Man, you keep that up for 5 years and you're wherever you should be. That isn't where someone else should be, right? Because you really are an individual. You just don't have insight into the tragedy of someone else's life. You know, and you might think, well, he's rich and successful. It's like, yeah, but you just don't know. You don't know what his relationship is with his wife or his children. You know, you don't know that he's gone through 2 divorces and his daughter won't talk to him and one of his kids is schizophrenic. And like most people's lives are pretty nicely saturated with tragedy, you know, and with a certain degree of malevolence. And you might think, well, I'd trade places with him in a minute. And I'm also not saying that some people don't have it really rough. It's like, look, man, some people have it rough. That's not the point. It's not the point. The point is, you should be better than you are, but it's not because you're worse than other people. It's because you're not everything you should be. And so you got to pick the comparison right. And then that's also ennobling. It's like, and instantly hopeful. There is absolutely no doubt that you can be slightly better tomorrow than you are today. You get more who you are as you get older. You know, so there's not, the ratio of actuality to potential starts to shift. But it doesn't change the underlying simple truth, which is, there is definitely something that you can do today that will make you slightly better for the next day. Always. Always. Now, not always. You're 85.
Right.
You have Alzheimer's. You know, you're done. Sometimes you're done. But most of the time you're not. And most of the time there's something within your grasp that you could put right. And see, that's the fundamental issue. It's like life is tragic. It's full of suffering and it's full of malevolence. There's no doubt about that. And it's brutal. And it's more brutal than you can even imagine in some ways, or willing to imagine. But there's something you could put right. And we don't know what would happen if you put everything you could right, if you put it right. And then we don't know what would happen if everyone did that. But you can be certain that it would be less tragic and less malevolent.